Hello and welcome to the Federal. On Sunday evening, August 15th, the world was caught by surprise when the news broke that Taliban had entered Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. It was long anticipated. The swiftness with which Taliban moved in, vanquishing the National Afghan Army without a modicum of resistance, left everyone shocked. The abrupt takeover ended 2 decades of American occupation of Afghanistan. The Foreign Office mandarins world over went into huddles immediately, trying to understand the new unraveling situation that has ramifications all over the globe. While our neighborhood foreign policy has been on a decline over the decades, the new development has thrown fresh challenges as far as India is concerned. So what does this mean for India? Clearly, Afghanistan is the latest challenge to India's foreign policy. So to discuss this and more, I'm joined by an eminent panel. But before I go further, I have a small announcement to make. Today at the Federal, we are formally launching a premium product, the 8 column. Though we have been featuring the section since the Federal was launched nearly 2 years ago, it's now being placed behind a paywall from today. The website is still 95% free. We are adopting a freemium model by placing only 5% of our offering behind the paywall. Rest, I reiterate, it continues to be free. Again, I'm reiterating, it is free. 95% is free. So the premium section costs rupees 365 a year. In other words, only rupee 1 a day. So kindly type in www.thefederal.com and subscribe to the section, which brings you articles and ground reports, which you would, which I'm saying rarely find in other publications. Now, coming back to the webinar, I welcome all the eminent panelists. We have very good lineup. First up, I welcome Ambassador Ganapathy. Good evening, sir. I'll first give a little brief about all the participants, and then we'll have an opening remarks by each one of them for about 5 to 6 minutes. After that, we'll throw the floor open for a discussion. In the later half, the final half of the program, it's we would invite opinion or even comments or even questions from the audience. It's a Q&A session. Now, Mr. Ambassador Ganapathy joined Indian Foreign Service IFS in 1975. He did various stints in South Block, the headquarters of External Affairs Ministry in New Delhi. His overseas postings included Moscow, the erstwhile Soviet Union, and Sofia, Singapore, London, Belgrade, and Moscow. This time again, he was, when it became a Russian Federation, as a minister and deputy chief of mission. He was Consul General of India, Sydney, from 2001 to 2005, Ambassador of India, Kuwait, from 2005 to 2008, and he also served as High Commissioner of India in Mauritius from 2008 to 2011. He retired as Secretary West, External Affairs, Minister of External Affairs in December 2012. Now I come to Mr. Rana Banerjee. He joined the IS, Indian Administrative Service, in 1972. He served as a senior bureaucrat in central government for 28 years and retired as Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretary in 2009. And during the service, he has dealt with security and other intelligence-related issues with focus on South Asian region. But to describe in one line, he's a walking encyclopedia on Afghanistan, as I could see his, whatever interviews he has given. Now, we have 3 veteran journalists with us. Shubir Bhaumik, he's an ex-BBC journalist and analyst of Eastern and Northeastern India. He brings a rare perspective on issues related to our eastern neighbors, such as Bangladesh and Nepal. Seema Guha is a foreign policy analyst and a senior journalist who has worked for several national newspapers, specializing in foreign affairs. She is currently the foreign editor of the Outlook magazine. Finally, I have with me K.S. Dakshinamurthy. He's a colleague of mine. He's an associate editor with the Federal, foreign policy veteran. He has been writing on the subject for decades in Indian and foreign publications. He was formerly an editor at Al Jazeera in Doha. Now, as we start, I request once again the panelists to make opening remarks for 5 minutes each. Later, we would open the whole thing for discussion. So I start with Mr. Ganapathy. Ambassador, even after 3 weeks, the ground situation in Afghanistan remains fluid. While it's speculated that the new regime headed by Mullah Baradar would soon take over the reins, there is a conflict raging in the nation's northern region. The Kabul airport remain out of bounds for many ordinary Afghans who still want to flee. The refugees are gathering on various borders, and the most vulnerable are the women and children. Now, as far as the neighboring nations are concerned, except China and Pakistan, regional players, big players, others including India, are still in a wait and watch mode. So in your view, how is the situation likely to pan out? Let's start telling us.
Good evening, Mr. Srinivasan, and to my fellow panelists. It's wonderful to be on the federal website webinar today evening. And of course, I see that all the other panelists know more about Afghanistan and the region than me. As they say, everyone is well aware of foreign policy, except the foreign policy practitioners. So I would put myself in that minority. Mr. Srinivasan, you mentioned foreign policy, foreign office mandarins. See, the Chinese influence is also felt there. China has been expanding its influence not only on a global plane, but also bilaterally, multilaterally, and into the chambers of various offices, looks like it. You mentioned decline of foreign policy in our neighborhood. I don't know whether decline is a very harsh word to put it in perspective. But yes, I think foreign policy in the neighborhood always calls for greater attention, because that's where the problems are, that's where the challenges are, and that's where the issues which left unaddressed can pose a problem to your national interest. And that's where, of course, as they say in foreign policy, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, but only permanent interests. And that is very much evident and visible in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, as we know, has been called as a graveyard of empires historically. And that is where it's come to haunt everybody. I think the ghosts of history can never be put down. And it not only haunts the country itself, because the people have been badly affected over the last couple of decades, so to say. And they are paying a price for the various actions, inactions, activities, and perhaps the disinterest of not only the leadership in Afghanistan, but also of those near and far. It's had a troubled history. I mean, right from, if you talk in terms of the kingdom, the 73 coup, and thereafter the Soviets came in. You had the Taliban regime. The US has been there for nearly 20 years. In fact, it's very, very appropriate that you are holding your webinar in the month of September, because I think in 8 days' time, it'll be the 20th year of 9/11, literally. And that is an important indicator of, you can put it into an important barometer of the developments and perhaps which way the wind blows insofar as Afghanistan is concerned. Now, if you look at where India has been, of course, we had excellent relations with the people of Afghanistan since historical times, right from colonial days and right after independence. I think this has perhaps been one of the closest relationship we have enjoyed over a period of time. Of course, the hiatus started once the Taliban came into the picture in the late 90s, and till 2001, till they were thrown out of office, literally. And of course, if you look at the period after 2001, we have had a period of, the relationship has been one of a roller coaster, so to say. And we have had a good equation with the leadership of Afghanistan in the first decade of this century, literally. And how will that be affected now? Since the Doha Accord came into play from February 2020. I mean, was the Doha Accord good? Did it benefit the USA? Did it benefit the neighborhood? Did it benefit the international community? Would be a question which will continue to haunt us. As I said, the word haunt is very much important. Have we seen a broad-based inclusive government in Afghanistan? Not yet, and we don't know when it will be. Has it been Afghan-led, Afghan-owned? Have the discussions been that? Not really, so to say. Have the Doha Accord been implemented in the 4 parameters which were put forth? And when the Americans said that nothing is final till everything is agreed upon, and nothing was agreed upon. Of the 4, only one was agreed upon, which was the withdrawal of the forces, and which took place on the 31st of August. In the previous dispensation of the Taliban, you had only 3 countries, UAE, KSA, and Pakistan, having the embassies. Now, in the current dispensation, you see the Pakistanis, the Chinese, and the Russians have not withdrawn the embassy, and so have the Turks continued with the embassy, and the Qataris. Where does this lead us to? In fact, many would say that, many have said that withdrawal of our ambassador and the embassy was wrong. I mean, in my own perception, I think it was not wrong, because you take decisions based on ground situation, and it would have been appropriate, because if something had happened to our ambassador with the ISI promoting the various factions, the Taliban leadership itself, the Haqqani faction, if something had happened, everyone would have blamed the government. So I think always the government would be in a no-win situation, to put it mildly. How soon would we go back? Would we recognize the Taliban? 2 issues, important issues on recognition. India recognizes states, and government's recognition of governments follows. The state of Afghanistan is recognized, but we have not recognized the government of whichever government is going to be formed. We don't know which government will form. They said yesterday we would have had a government. It's still not so. Would we have a government in the near future? We don't know. And of course, there have been also a lot of pages have been, a lot of effort has been put in to see on the meeting which took place on the 31st of August in the Embassy of India, Doha, between the Ambassador of India, Deepak Malik, and the Taliban representative, Sher Mohammad Stanekzai. I should, of course, say that Deepak Malik knows the region very well, having been Joint Secretary, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, having been in the Prime Minister's office, and now in Doha, where he would have closely followed the activities of the Taliban, the Doha Accord movement, and also, in terms of the meeting, I think it was just a meeting. It was not recognizing or according legitimacy to any faction or the other. The considerations were evacuation of Indian nationals when it comes to it, those who are remaining and those who want to come to India. And of course, also reinforcing the point which we have made repeatedly, is that the territory of Afghanistan should not be used for any terror-related activity against India and its interests. And of course, interests also would imply in the long run, when it comes to it, on the development assistance of around 3 billion, which we have accorded to Afghanistan. So I think now I think there's been also a lot of debate on the 2 UN presidential statements made by our permanent representative, Mr. Tirumurti, Ambassador Tirumurti, on the first statement, including the word Taliban, the second statement, not having the word Taliban there. And as the former permanent representative put it, a fortnight is a long time in politics, a fortnight is a long time in diplomacy. And I think the 2 statements should be read in conjunction with the developments taking place on ground. But the more important point, when you started your opening remarks, Mr. Srinivasan, you mentioned 15th August. Of course, that is when the Taliban came and stormed into the presidential palace in Kabul. I think John Reed had in 1917 talked of 10 days that shook the world. I think the 10 days here have literally shaken the region. Quickly on the region, I would say, of course, Mr. Banerjee, when he speaks, I'm sure will speak extensively on the Pakistan influence on the Taliban. But to my mind, there's no doubt that the influence of ISI and the Pakistani authorities, particularly the army, is significant. And no doubt at all, we will have to wait and see whether the Taliban would be a puppet on a string. Of course, there is no doubt that the Taliban of 1996 and the Taliban of today are totally different. The Taliban is in a stronger position. It's more media savvy, as we would have seen by the various spokespersons who have come on it. In terms of India, you have had, I think, first Shaheen Suhail talking in terms of good relations with India. So did Anas Haqqani mention it, and so has the media person Habibullah Mujahid. But there have always been some nuances, which has come up again in Suhail Shaheen's statement yesterday in terms of minorities. So I think what India will do is a wait and watch mode and see how the situation evolves. For Pakistan, of course, it is a victory right now. We don't know how the victory will be converted by them, whether the Taliban will listen to them, and whether that would be counterproductive for India or whether that would pose risks for India. In terms of China, for China, of course, Abdul Ghani Baradar, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar was in...
He visited. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, he even visited.
Yeah, he was in Tianjin where he met the foreign minister of China. And I think the Chinese interest is three. I think one is, of course, for them, reiteration from they required a guarantee from the Taliban that they would not promote and support the ETIM, that is the East Turkestan Islamic movement. The second was, of course, China would like to ensure that the mineral riches come back. And that's where Habibullah Mujahid and others have said that they would seek Chinese support in extraction of copper and lithium and others, and that they would welcome Chinese development assistance.
So, Ambassador, I would intervene here. What I would do is, let me go to others. I think.
Can I just conclude?
Yeah, you covered the three areas.
Yeah, the last point, of course, was the BRI, which I should mention. Yeah. And of course, finally, for us, the security situation there would be very, very important. We'll continue to monitor the development and see whether there are any repercussions in terms of the Pakistan-based terrorist organizations against India, particularly Jammu and Kashmir. So I think wait and watch, keep a close eye on developments, and see that there's nothing inimical which affects India would be our buzzword, and that would be our mantra. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you. I think you raised lots of questions. It's about China, it's about Pakistan, but I'll come back to Mr. Banerjee. See, you've been a very close observer of this region, and it's very clear, even Ambassador Ganapathy said this Pak influence and ISA influence is very, very well known. It's very well recorded, and in Afghanistan. And now we know that this is going to play an important role as there is a celebratory mood in initially as far as Pakistan is concerned. But what is it for India? How is this likely to pan out for India? What are the kind of challenges we face there, if you can outline?
Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. Thank you for having me on the Federal, and my good wishes for your going into specialized modes, various modes you talked about in the beginning. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Ambassador Ganapathy has really said it all. For me to encapsulate or stress on some of the aspects. Yes, for India, the developments have certainly been a setback to a certain extent, unavoidably so. But it does not mean the end of the world. We have to, as he said, wait and watch and see the situation as it develops, and the opportunities for engagement, not recognition initially, may come at a later stage. Even as I speak, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, the Director General of the ISI, came into Kabul. He's such a well-known figure, photogenically. Even some foreign journalists from the West, they recognized him in the West. He's very elegantly turned out. He's sartorially elegant. He considers it necessary to not be seen too much in the uniform. Even a few weeks back, he had been observed in a photograph which became viral at the Kandahar mosque, praying along with some Taliban leaders, presumably Mullah Baradar. But this time, his presence in Kabul at this juncture has sort of raised or caused tongues wagging about the delays in the formation of the Taliban government. Maybe that there is some factionalism which is persisting and causing problems in their uh, final declaration of government portfolios, or maybe that the pressing need which the Taliban have to seek recognition from Western powers, especially so that the financial aid strings could resume, may have made it imperative to try for an inclusive setup, which hasn't yet happened. The Taliban have won a military victory. They would not be in any mood, particularly, the Taliban would not be in any mood to share power. As regards the influence of the Pakistanis, that's very, very obvious. There is a mood of exaltation and triumphalism in Pakistan. Their foremost objective of policy over all these years of trying to promote or keep the Taliban as their main support proxy, shall we say, was about the need to keep Indian influence out of Afghanistan, and that is something that they were very keen to achieve. And one can say, perhaps in the short term, they may have achieved this objective, though they may be hoist by their own petard in course of time. In fact, there is a very, very sobering article today in the Dawn by Ambassador Riaz Muhammad Khan, one of Pakistan's very foremost and wise diplomats, who has had all the right, shall we say, exposure. He has been ambassador to China and Afghanistan. He's written a book on Afghanistan. He is married to an American lady who worked in the US State Department. So he has seen the world from all perspectives. And what he feels is that, yes, for Pakistan, there is, of course, a moment of, great joy. But the Taliban have a lot of challenges of governance in which Pakistan would be expected to help them out, as they had helped them out, holding their fingers in almost every realm in the first stint between 96 to 2001. This time, albeit the Taliban are much more savvy in media handling terms, but ideologically they have not at all changed. Their views may have been only tempered by the need to appear more reasonable. Actually, ideologically, they are as committed to the Sharia, to the Islamic Amirat, and they will try to sugarcoat all these pills for the world to swallow. In the process, the issue of Durand Line should come up. I mean, it could come up as a thorn between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, the advice of Ambassador Riaz Muhammad Khan to Pakistan policymakers is to learn to treat the Durand Line as a non-issue and not raise it with the Afghans. Yet they have almost completed fencing along the entire border, which is a nettlesome issue for Afghans. So this could be a potential trouble spot in the future. Then, about suspicions of Indian overreach, he has also cautioned that India's role as a regional player cannot be wished away. We have, or we continue to enjoy, a lot of goodwill in Afghanistan, primarily because of the manner in which we have extended development assistance and health, medical insurance, travel programs, our assistance to build infrastructure, transmission lines, electricity, dams, hospitals, schools, and encourage Afghan scholarships into Indian universities. All these things have stood us in very great stead with the Afghan people, and this would not be easily wished away. The only thing is, our contacts with the Taliban will have to be very careful and taken with a great deal of caution. because of the lack of trust, complete lack of trust, and our past experience of security adversities which we have faced in Afghanistan. The attack on our mission, or even going back to IC 814, the behavior of the Taliban then, and the attack on our embassy in 2008, where the Sirajuddin Haqqani faction was definitely involved in the planning and implementation of the attack, where we lost our senior diplomats and military personnel. So we cannot just forget this, in spite of the assurances which Mr. Stanekzai may have given to Deepak Mittal in Doha. We will have to tread with caution, and we will have to see if the security situation evolves in not only Kabul but in the rest of the country in a manner in which we could at least take the Taliban assurances at face value. The whole process of their engagement in diplomacy during the Doha process has shown that they have not fulfilled any of the promises that they extended to the rest of the international community for intra-Afghan dialogue or for ceasefire. But they got whatever they wanted, the release of Taliban prisoners, and then the unexpected collapse of the Afghan National Security Forces, of course, brought about by the US announcement of fixed dates for withdrawal, played into the Taliban hands. And today we have a situation where only the Panjshir Valley is holding out, maybe not for long. But there are pockets of resistance. The women in Afghanistan have experienced 20 years of liberation and freedom, comparative freedoms. But they will now have to go back to a sort of existence which would be fearful. So we will then need to evaluate how the Taliban cope with the challenges of governance they themselves have. They are formidable challenges, and they will need assistance from India eventually. So we will then have to wait and watch for the situation to evolve. We have not lost everything. We should not be despondent. We should wait and let things play to our favor. The factionalism within the Taliban is just surviving. It is below the surface. It could evolve later, which is where we could sort of play things to our advantage. So therefore, at this stage, I would say that we should not be despondent, but we should watch the situation very carefully. Of course, we should not be complacent on the issue of Islamic elements who have been sheltered by the Taliban, who could create problems for us in Kashmir. But this would very much depend on the will and intention of their Pakistani masters. They won't, the Taliban themselves won't do this on their own. So again, we should not be too much alarmist in this regard, but at the same time, we should remain watchful. I think I'll conclude at this juncture.
Thank you very much. We'll come back again. So I think, Mr. Banerjee, you made a very important point, and in a way, there are two words which Ambassador used the word haunt, and you're using the word trust. Now, I would ask Seema, I mean, this seems to be a very, these are two keywords. And we have seen the past, we have seen the current events unfolding in front of us, and you being a very close observer of, I'll again use the Chinese word mandarins in North Block. How do you see the situation from there?
I see is this is a major challenge for Indian foreign policy, because Afghanistan is not far away. It's our neighbor. We are very close to Afghanistan. So there's a major challenge, and at the moment, as of today, as a journalist, I see that Pakistan has finally got what it had planned for decades, to have strategic depth in Kabul. That is, have a government which is pro-Pakistan. So, having said that, India is today in a position which Pakistan was in 2001. Because at that time, the Pakistani diplomats here in Delhi were all, oh my God, all our investments gone for nothing. We've done so much for the Taliban, and now this has happened. And initially, of course, Karzai didn't warm up to us. It took a little bit of time. But for the last 20 years, India has had a great run in Afghanistan. So we've been able to build our, by opening all our consulates that we had earlier. We've also been troubling Pakistan. Mr. Rana Banerjee and all will know better than this. But the Pakistanis are always accusing the Afghan government, helping the Indians and Indians funding and having terror strikes in Balochistan as a tit for tat for what happens in India. So Pakistan at the moment is really thrilled. They have got what they want. India used its time very well for the last 20 years by building a $3 billion of investment were spent very well for a change. India doesn't do very well when we go to other countries and promise to do this and that. We take ages, as Shubir will know about Myanmar and all that. But here we were excellent. We did only 2 major projects. One was Parliament and the other was repairing the Salma Dam. But beyond that, I think Ambassador had mentioned, we did small little projects that touches people's lives. And that really built our popularity there. So in a way, you cannot also blame the Indian government for always supporting, for not smelling the coffee, that things were changing. Because India's position is, we will not talk to the terrorists. We will support a government that is democratically elected. Fine, and it suited India very well because Kabul and Delhi in unison would go on talking about terrorists coming from Pakistan and put Pakistan in a spot all the time. So after 20 years, good run, we are in this position today. And the sad part is that India should have realized you don't towards, I'm not saying right at the beginning, but from the time the Americans started talking to them, you cannot put all your eggs in one basket. This is what we did. That was our problem. Though they say, oh, we are talking to all stakeholders, they were very averse to talk to the Taliban, mainly because I think they did not want to displease the Kabul government, whether it was Hamid Karzai in the beginning or it's Ashraf Ghani till the other day. So India, I think, backed too much on what Kabul was telling them. And in fact, in our briefings from the foreign ministry, what India's thinking was that even if the Taliban has got control of the countryside, they will take a long time to get into the metropolitan areas and especially into Kabul. This is what they had been assured and reassured by everybody, all the senior Afghan ministers and the president. So India, I think, depended too much on them. Okay, that is one thing. The other thing is, actually what I have heard is that initially India tried to reach out to the Taliban. Not now, long ago, but they were trying the local guys. And every time they did that, that person would be eliminated, and probably by the Haqqani network. And you know how upset Pakistan was because India was spreading its influence in the area. And as Mr. Rana Banerjee has already said, 2008, we had an attack on our embassy. I think 6 months later, again, they tried, and they have been attacking us and trying to make us get back. But we had stood firm. And the problem is, after all this, perhaps India thought it's no point talking to the Taliban. I don't know what they thought, but they shouldn't have thought like that. As a major player, as a major power, if you want to remain relevant, you can talk to the Taliban, have your red lines. And talking to them doesn't mean endorsement. We all know that. The Americans were talking, the Brits were talking, you was talking, Russia told us to talk. Hamid Karzai himself suggested we talk. Then Zalmay, about Khalilzad, he also asked India to talk. We were not talking. I don't know why we waited for so long. I just feel that we should have talked to everyone.
Yeah, Seema, very interesting. I think I'll take this point immediately to my colleague Dakshin.
Yeah.
See, Dakshin, she's saying that probably we missed something. We did very well. The beginning was very good. We all along these 20 years we used it very well. But somewhere along the way, did we miss the bus? Should we have spoken to Taliban earlier, or we should have done what we have done currently? What's your view on that?
Let's look at the Taliban itself. I think we have to fundamentally understand what the Taliban is today. And I think as far as India's foreign policy is concerned, it's not very surprising that not much overtures were made in the last 20 years. Because during much of this time, the Taliban was largely seen as a terrorist organization. It was seen as an outlier, and it was on its way out. And this was the kind of a broad media narrative that was being built. It's only after Obama's reign, when the US stopped its direct military operations in Afghanistan in December 31, 2014. That there was some kind of a feeling that things were not really the way it seemed to be. But the point here is that if you take the Taliban itself, we should reassess the Taliban. I think it's really important to take a relook at the Taliban, because the Taliban, which came to power in 1996, came from a different context. It arose from a certain situation where people, of course, there was no precedent to that. The Taliban came to power in 96, and until 2001, they were stooges of Pakistan. It was very clear. And then India, really had to suffer with Kandahar, etc., etc. But the point now, in 20 years, there has been a change in the situation, as far as the Taliban is concerned. For one, the relationship between Taliban and Pakistan is not the same. There are, of course, the Haqqani network is there, which is a direct extension of the Pakistani deep state. But within the Taliban, it's not that everybody is anti-India. There is a section which is open to having a relationship with India. And in my view, it's the Indian foreign government or the foreign policy establishment that should be more proactive, and not take a lot of things for granted or be presumptuous about dealing with them. What I find is this discreet talks with the Taliban. Why should India talk discreetly to the Taliban? There was a meeting in Doha, which was reported a couple of days later. In fact, the Qatari minister revealed that India had made overtures to Taliban. Why should it be that way? It should have been much more open. Why should it be so defensive? Why should India always be so defensive? China openly called them over to to their country, openly spoke to them. Why should India all the time, be on the back foot? I personally think that it's really time that India showed some kind of a muscle and some kind of guts, and show that they can look at the Taliban differently, work with the elements within the Taliban that are at least tilted a little bit towards India. The challenges are definitely there. The Haqqani network is there. Pakistan is there. China also is there. They wouldn't want any kind of a bonhomie between the Taliban and India. But it is a challenge. That is why it is a challenge, a cakewalk. So India needs to look at it. This wait and watch is something I simply do not understand. And I think this wait and watch, India does it all the time, anywhere in the world, and it will never act at the end of it. They'll keep on waiting and watching. This is my view.
I agree with you.
Okay, that's very interesting, Dakshin. I think, but we have one more guest. We'll just go to him quickly for his opening remarks, then we'll open it for wider discussion. Bhaumik, how do you see the situation? I know you're in a very specifically, you're located in a very specific location, northeast, and you have very wide understanding of that area. But overall, what is the kind of impact you think the situation is unraveling in Afghanistan is likely to happen?
Mr. Srinivasan, I will actually focus on Afghanistan as a challenge policy, not Afghanistan per se, but what it means for the rest of the region, the other neighbors. And I can assure you that the earthquake is traveling eastwards. I've picked up definite vibes from Bangladesh, where the present government of Sheikh Hasina is very worried about an upsurge of Islamist radical activity because they are inspired by the Taliban victory, the ultimate victory of the faith and that kind of stuff. Senior Bangladesh officials have actually said that many of our youngsters are trying to reach the Afpak region through India. Some of them have been arrested here in West Bengal. And of course, there are some reactions from Myanmar as well that we are picking up, mixed reactions, from the present Myanmar military regime. So I think, being an Eastern man, I will stick to the impact of the Taliban takeover in Kabul in the eastern part of India, where neighbors like Bangladesh and Myanmar are extremely important for India's Act East policy. There can't be any Act East unless we have friendly regimes both in Dhaka and, of course, in Yangon, or rather Naypyidaw at the moment. And I'll focus on that because Mr. Banerjee, Mr. Ganapathy has talked a lot about, and Srimatu, about Afghanistan. I'm no Afghan expert.
Right. It's a very, very unusual perspective. We do want that. Please go on.
So let me, talk about the Eastern sort of angle in this whole Taliban thing. Number one, Bangladesh. Now, there are three angles here. Yesterday, a very senior friend of mine, who is basically an intelligence officer, but he is now in the Cabinet Security Committee. He called me up and asked me very straight, why is your ambassador meeting the Taliban? Is India going to recognize them? The Bangladeshis, and especially the present regime in Bangladesh, are very worried that any recognition to Taliban will have implications, because in Bangladesh, people know that we back Sheikh Hasina. And much as we don't need to put all our eggs in one basket, as Brajesh Mishra once said, and in 2001 went and backed the we BNP and Jamaat coalition, it did not work out our way. Terrorism in the eastern part increased leaps and bounds because the Pakistan ISI began to use Bangladesh as their operational base for troubling the eastern part of India, the northeastern part of India. So in Bangladesh, as they say, we have only one basket, at the moment at least. We may have to deal with any government which comes to power, but other baskets, as Mr. Banerjee will agree with me, are bottomless. So now, how does the Sheikh Hasina government look at it? Number one, they are very keenly observing whether India defends some of our friends who are now out of power and perhaps on the run. Because this is something that is very significant, that whether India is going to stand up by their allies, or their traditional allies, by their traditional friends. Whether we back somebody like Amrullah Saleh, who has been very close to us for different reasons that has been stated by my previous speakers, or Ahmed Masood, whose father was very close to India, Ahmed Shah Masood. So this is something the Hasina camp will very closely watch, because when in 2001, the BNP came to power and unleashed a reign of terror, even Sheikh Hasina's rally was bombed and she nearly died. A lot of our, and we were sharing some of them, I know for a fact. The Wahhabi League, which is very important for us in the East and in Bangladesh, they are observing very closely. And anything that we do, which may give them the idea that India does not stand by its loyalists, can have implications. Number one. Number two, they are themselves worried because it's a Muslim majority nation, and there is a strong radical Islamist fringe, which may not be big in numbers, but they have enough troublemaking capacity, as we have seen in the last 2 years, sometimes on the issue of Mujib statue, sometimes on the issue of Narendra Modi visiting Bangladesh. They have gone on the rampage, Hifazat-e-Islam and all these other terror groups. And let me, Mr. Srinivasan, make it very clear here that there is an Islamist radical ecosystem in Bangladesh. There is no difference between BNP and Jamaat-e-Islami, which are the political parties, the Hifazat-e-Islam, which controls the madrasas, but is not contesting elections. And of course, the various terror groups like Jamaatul Mujahideen, they're part of the same ecosystem, and they all want to bring down the Murtad government, as they call it, apostate government of Sheikh Hasina. So here there is a big battle to be fought, because if something happens in Bangladesh and Sheikh Hasina is not around, the Awami League falls from power as it did in 2001, then we are in real trouble. Then we will have a double whammy. We have one in Afghanistan, as Seema said, and we'll have one here. And this is more important in the sense that our northeastern security of our northeastern region depends on a friendly regime in Bangladesh. I don't have to elaborate it. It's all very obvious. When Sheikh Hasina is in power, she catches all the Alpha and all these, rebel groups and hand over to India, and we can sleep in peace. That they're on the table today talking to India is not because of the Indian army operations there, which has been there for a long time, but because Sheikh Hasina bundles them out and handed over to us. This is number one. So here, Bangladesh is right, in the middle. And we have West Bengal on one side and the northeastern states on the other, and the Himalayan region on the top. So anything that goes wrong in Bangladesh will have serious implications. Let's look at Myanmar and how the Myanmarese military junta is looking at it. They are worried that this Taliban victory can energize some of the Rohingya underground groups, because it's seen as the ultimate victory of the faith, and may lead to some Rohingya terrorist activity in the Rakhine region, which is important. But they are also happy for another region, Mr. Srinivasan. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm listening.
Oh, sorry. No, suddenly your image went off. The Burmese military junta is very happy that for another reason. They want to see whether the Taliban can be legitimized by China and some of the other players in the game when the West is not very happy with them. They have the same predicament. Like the Taliban faces now, the Burmese military junta, which also took power by force, like the Taliban, are in a similar predicament. They are totally dependent on Chinese international support, to survive, not just legitimacy. They don't have legitimacy. So they are very closely watching whether Chinese backing can get the Taliban some kind of legitimacy by which the regime can survive there, because that's good news for them. Then the West will fail in pushing for democracy. And of course, India will have no option but to deal with them, which we are doing at the moment. So there are mixed signals from here. Nepal also is very important, because in Nepal, in Bangladesh, we always have had favorites. We want Awami League to be in power in Bangladesh. There is no hiding this fact. And we want Nepali Congress to be in power in Nepal. Now, for all these traditional friends of India, how we deal with the Afghan situation, what we do with those who have been ousted from power, sometimes is more important for these people than what kind of legitimacy the Taliban is going. It is what India will do to us, because these forces like Nepali Congress or Awami League have traditionally depended very much on Indian support, not on the West. Sheikh Hasina has always had a problem with the West. She firmly believes that the American CIA was responsible for her father's assassination. But as we all know that in 2007-8, when the Americans were backing openly, Hillary Clinton was openly backing the military-backed caretaker regime in Bangladesh. It is Pranab Mukherjee who hotly contested this whole thing, had a 1-hour verbal duel with Hillary Clinton and said that there must be free elections in Bangladesh. And bulging biceps American Marines cannot restore democracy. It's the homegrown secular forces. And therefore, their elections were held and Sheikh Hasina came to power. So these forces are traditionally dependent on India. And what we do in Afghanistan is something very closely watched by them.
Yeah.
So I think the Taliban impact, the Afghanistan impact, or the challenge for our foreign policy is not restricted to Afghanistan or the West per se. It has reverberations in the East. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Subir, you have really laid out a completely new dimension to this whole discussion. I'll come back to Ambassador. Ambassador, you were saying initially that you were about to say what could be the implication of the whole thing for Kashmir, or how this could pan out for us in that space. But it appears that there are there are many moving parts. It's you have to deal with the western flank. You have to also look at your interest of your neighbors on the eastern flank. And then we haven't even considered what it could impact the other neighboring countries around India. But definitely, the one important point which you made was that while we recognize the state, not the government as of now, and that is a question which we must wait and watch. Now, I think it's a real challenge. How do you think now the foreign office should move on this?
Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. I think let me compliment Mr. Subir Bhaumik on this fascinating presentation of the eastern flank, if I can use such a word, because very rarely, I think, in our discourse on Afghanistan or other places, we talk or look at East. We act East, but don't write much about the East. I think that is the tragedy of the situation.
But you talk East, you don't act East, sir. You talk East.
I think the other important thing which I should mention is it's good that Federal is doing this webinar, because in the South, not many get to look at presentations or issues which affect the entire country. Similarly, I think those in the North don't look at the South. So I think we need to look at it holistically, which is very, very important. India as a union is what we should look at. And foreign policy always has responses and reverberations on domestic policy, and is a reflection of what domestic policy could do. I think, first of all, before I answer your question, I should respond to a point made by Mr. Dakshinamurthy. I think he used the word guts. India should have the guts. I think it's very, very important. Yes, you should have the guts, but if it is not resolute or if it's not purposeful, the very point is lost. Because I think having served in some of the countries, not in the neighborhood, but having watched them very closely, and where one has, of course, in the various chancelleries, had an occasion to reflect and counterpoise various issues posed to the government where I served in by some of our neighbors who are inimical to our interests. I think we have to be very careful how we move forward. And I think that is where wait and watch situation does not mean inactivity. I think as one of my colleagues the other day in one of the debates was talking, used a British phrase, masterful inactivity. I don't think we have a position of masterful inactivity anywhere. I think wait and watch does not mean sitting in your haunches. I think it is to see that your interests are reflected in a holistic way rather than looking at it in a linear fashion. How does it look at? How does the situation look? First of all, let's be very clear. There's no government in Kabul today. Do we have a government? Do we have? If they have a government, what sort of players are in the government? That is another point we have to look at. Third, which are the levers of authority and power, which agencies or confluence of interests would direct that particular government to pose its policy towards India. I think these are very important issues before we jump into the cauldron. Having talks upfront, or would it have made sense to invite some of the leaders from the Taliban to India? Definitely not. I would even shudder to think of this possibility at all. The Chinese could do it. Abdul Ghani Baradar could visit Beijing, because Beijing is interested in what Pakistan does and in what Taliban would do. And I think, would that form an axis against us? That is the China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, or would this axis cap our interests? China, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the cap word. Would that affect our interests? Would be a very important point before we jump in. I think to look at it, I would say that what the government is doing, what the foreign policy practitioners are doing. I won't like to use the word czars or mandarins. I would like to use the word practitioners, which would be more appropriate and opposite. I think they know what they are doing well. If I were to look at various ambassadors to Afghanistan from India who have been making various presentations, you could see a straight discord between the various views which they have presented. But most of them have been very cautious in advocating a policy of wait, watch, and then move. I think make haste slowly would be more appropriate here in this context. And I think, as Mr. Subir Bhaumik mentioned, in terms of the other eastern flanks, I think it is very important. Now, coming to Jammu and Kashmir, which Mr. Srinivasan posed the question. Yes, I think Habibullah Mujahid or Suhail Shaheen or Anis Haqqani have been very clear in saying that they would not do anything which would promote terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. They have also pointed out that they would not support any group which is against India there. They have also talked of the point that the question of Jammu and Kashmir is between India and Pakistan, to be sorted out bilaterally between them. I think that's all fine. But these are all spokesmen of a group which has not yet taken office in Kabul, which is very, very important. When they take office in Kabul, when a government is formed, and would that be all-inclusive, broad-based, and what sort of views they would bring forth to the table vis-a-vis India and vis-a-vis Jammu and Kashmir, which is an integral part of India, without any doubt, would be a point which we would need to take note of. That is why I think I use the word that we have to watch the situation closely as it develops. We should not make haste. We should make haste slowly. In fact, in this context, I think the interaction between the Prime Minister and President Putin is very, very significant. In fact, for the first time, I noticed that the Russians have elaborated more on the discussions on Afghanistan. Of course, 3 sentences compared to what we did. Our statement talks of discussing the unfolding situation in Afghanistan and its implications for the region and the world, and that we should remain in touch, the senior officials, whereas the Kremlin statement says that exchanging opinions on Afghanistan, the 2 parties noted the importance of concerted efforts which would help establish peace and stability in the country and ensure security in the region in general. They expressed their determination to increase cooperation in opposing the spread of terrorist ideology and drug threat from Afghan territory. Of course, they then talk of agreed, that is, the Kremlin says, agreed to establish a 2-way channel for permanent consultations. That is a bilateral consultation. I think that is perhaps very, very significant. Of course, Seema Goa did talk of Zamir Kabilov.
So I just want to intervene here. I want to ask a question. See, it's an important point. When the Chinese met Taliban and also Russians met them, I think one kind of thing we want to extract promise out of Taliban is that terror, their soil won't be used for jihadist, growth or terror, generating more terror there. So this is one point which Chinese are interested, Russians are interested, so is India.
As the US.
And I'm sure, at least you should also like to say all this, but can that be taken on its face value? Because you did mention about, while mentioning in Jammu and Kashmir, I'm not very sure whether Sirajuddin Haqqani or his network actually gave any promise on that. Even can their promise be taken on its face value?
Oh, Anas Haqqani did mention to one of the news channels very clearly that Jammu and Kashmir is a matter for India. I think he did say that there would be Afghanistan would not do anything which is inimical to India. What is very, very important, I would like to use a Russian phrase here, which says "doveryai no proveryai," which means trust but verify. I think this is very, very important because you can now, as long as a government does not take office in Kabul, 1, and 2, as long as this government does not spell out the task before it, the actions it would take, and what sort of issues it would address. I think can we first interact with someone in Kabul, and 2, how do we, deeds are more important than words. So I think we would like to see what the deeds would be based on the words, and trust only on the basis of verification. So can we trust? Not yet. We will have to wait and see, because it is still it is coalescing. There is nothing. It's still in the cauldron, it's still in the making. The khichdi is still not yet being cooked. So we can't taste it yet, you see. So let's wait and see how the pot brings out, what the pot brings out before we take perfect action. That is where wait, watch very closely, observe closely every word, every nuance, every letter before we go take the next step.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to quickly ask Mr. Rana Banerjee. Here is a point. Seema said that she made a point that India has made good use of these 20 years and managed to kind of, secure its interest. As far as development are concerned, it was a more nuanced development which we did there, granular development rather, which reached, touched people's lives, individual people's lives. So we have been working on development issues, security issues also, which is what she indicated. And that's a subject you would, really be, can tell us about that. Will that change now because of the change in the situation now where Taliban is may come to center, has come to center stage, may assume power now anytime. So do we stand to lose all the gains on the security aspect?
Srini, actually, 1 minute, I just want to tell you something.
Yeah.
That the Pakistanis are just very happy about that at least now we can have, Indians won't be, doing their little game there. But this is what they're saying, so.
Right. So how do we face that challenge? Yeah, that's what I want to pose. How do we face that challenge, this challenge?
Well, certainly on the security front, we will have a setback in the sense that the National Defense and Security, the NDS, which is the Afghan intelligence service, will no longer be amenable to deal with us as a friendly country or as a friendly agency, shall we say. So that is absolutely clear, and there should be no doubt for anybody in this regard. So we have to start from scratch, and we should not expect any cooperation from the Taliban in this regard. In fact, we have to see how much damage would have been done by the haste with which the NDS disintegrated or wound up, what were the records, whether they were destroyed or not. One presumes that the normal security precautions may have been taken, but the dangers remain. I would not like to spell out in further detail in this regard. It should be very obvious to our panelists. But as regards the development programs, it's a different kettle of fish. Always we have implemented developmental assistance through the government in power, government of the day. And that could still apply to the Taliban once it is decided to have engagement with their government. That could come at a later stage. And the schemes, as I already mentioned earlier, had considerable value generating goodwill. In fact, during one of my track 2 visits there in 2016 to Kabul, we were shown by the tourist guide the brilliant parliament building which has been constructed in visual distance of the ruined Afghan palace. And the travel guide, who was an Afghan, sort of smirked that this destroyed ruin of the old king's palace represented the policy of Pakistan, and the new parliament represented the policy of India. One felt very proud to even listen to this type of a description. Of course, for the Taliban, it may not have this type of a value, because the Haqqani network, and even when the Taliban were fighting the Ghani government, they have tried to destroy the new parliament building, and it was also hit by some missiles. So that was unfortunate. But and the Taliban do not value the concept of elections at all. But having a government may make them a little more sober in the manner in which they evaluate the existing institutions which are there in Afghanistan. They may not have any utility for the parliament building as of now, but later on it might be the focus of a shura or a leadership shura or a loya jirga, which are concepts acceptable to them. So this type of possibilities cannot be ruled out.
Okay, thanks. See, Dakshin, you have been making a point about Taliban, and you said that 2.0 is very different. Taliban 2.0 is very different from Taliban 1.0, how it was in 1996 and how it is right now. But one underlying theme which remains, and which Mr. Banerjee pointed out, that the core ideology hasn't changed. That remains the same. But then, while dealing with foreign policy, one has to be optimistic. One has to see how best one can use to one's advantage. How do you see now the situation developing with Taliban making, multiple statements? So are you able to draw any conclusion? Because, there are, they seem to be saying everything for everyone.
See, what the Taliban thinks and the fact that the Taliban is back in power is a given. Now, however, anybody else, any other country might want it to be or wish that they are different, that is not going to happen, because they have come to, they come back to Kabul after a victory. It is not that, there is also a general impression being given that, people get to get a feeling that the US went out, there was a peace deal and they withdrew and the Taliban came. But the fact of the matter is, the Taliban has actually defeated the United States and the coalition troops, and that's why they are back in Kabul. Now, what I see we should do in India is that look for any kind of change. Now, one of the changes is that, one of the possibilities is that there is a section within the Taliban that is still not forgiven Pakistan for the attacks on Waziristan, when the Taliban was in exile in Pakistan. And a great deal of anger was there from a section of the Taliban. Now, the point is, one of the reasons why some of them still speak not so unkindly about India, but not that, we can draw too much of a inference from that. At the same time, India has, has a long historical relationship. That is one thing. Plus, in the last 20 years, like Seema was pointing out, India has done some very good projects in Afghanistan. So there is a kind of a popular support for India. And so India must work towards these issues rather than constantly harping on the Islamist or the radical Islamism of the Taliban. Because by talking about that, nothing is being, nothing can come from that. It's not like they're going to change just because India is saying something. I mean, it is quite absurd, actually. So that is a given. So in certain situations, the point is, in fact, why do you think that the West has already started thinking of talking to the Taliban? The countries in Europe have already started sending feelers to the Taliban, and they kind of figure out what kind of a relationship that they can have. After having fought this war directly for the last 20 years, having sent the troops along with the US in Kabul. So we must, the point here is that India should also change with the situation and not keep on harping about, their Islamic credentials or the fact that they are very repressive. Yes, no liberal, secular Democrat can support the Taliban, but that is at one level. That is at a level of discussion. But when it comes to foreign policy, what we are basically talking is India's engagement with Afghanistan. Now, the point here is that if the Taliban, assuming that they do not change their ideology or they remain the way they are, does it mean that India completely cuts off any kind of relationship with the Taliban or with Afghanistan? Who is the loser? India is the loser, because we have seen what happened between 96 and 2001. In the absence of any kind of relationship, it becomes a black hole for India. And, and that the lack of a relationship emboldens the Taliban to take on India, because they know that there can be no repercussions. In the absence of a relationship, there can be no repercussions. So this has to be, the Taliban has to be seen differently. Some of the popular support that India has within Afghanistan, its long-standing relationship with Afghanistan, plus the fact that there are some within the Taliban who are not averse to having a relationship with India. I think these positives should be explored. That is the point.
Okay. Seema, I just want to ask a quick question. Is there any thinking within the within South Bloc about how to use? There is a certain soft power which India has enjoyed all these years, and even the Taliban may not be one homogeneous group. There would be, like Dakshin is kind of indicating, that you could have variants of it. There could be soft, if not everybody need not be very hardcore. There could be who could be doing a kind of a different line. And then today the women in Afghanistan are very different from what they were 20 years ago. They haven't seen, some of them wouldn't have even seen the first regime or government of Taliban. They're very different. And they're educated, they're come up and they're in important positions. And for a country like India, like it has a repercussion, like even our friend from East is pointing out that, are we protecting our friends? Are we backing those who believe in us? So these are the kind of challenges. Is there any thinking going on this in our ministry?
Srini, I must tell you, the South Bloc at the moment is going to do nothing. As Ambassador Ganpati said, and Rana Banerjee, all of them were saying, you wait and see. They're not thinking of anything. But I feel very strongly that they should have given out many more e-visas to Afghans, not just Afghan Hindus and Sikhs. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about ordinary Afghans who helped India and who have some relationship with India. If they wanted to come, we should have brought them in. We should have brought in more people. And I think now we should send them some aid as soon as it is possible for the people. I'm not saying engage or recognize. Of course, don't recognize them. I'm not saying all that. But we must be seen to be doing something for the people. This is what I feel. But I don't know. I don't think the government is going to do anything right now.
Right. But then you need a government to do that. See,
yes, this is my suggestion to the government.
Yeah. No, I'm saying government in...
no, I mean, at the moment, they're not thinking of anything right now. They'll wait and see.
Well, Ambassador Ganapati, I think...
You will know better. Ask him.
Yeah, but I think can one take such a position that the government is not thinking anything? I think, but I would definitely like to ask one question here. That foreign policy is some kind of a long-term vision you need, and then you go on adjusting as you face immediate situation. You kind of try to maneuver those situations. But it was very clear, maybe when even Americans have begun to lose interest in Afghanistan, even during Obama time, when they begin to no longer talk about an absolute victory, but managing the situation. And then later the Doha talks. So all I'm trying to say is there is enough timeline available for India to start thinking about a possible scenario where Taliban could come back. So I kind of don't agree with Seema that they may not be thinking at all, but I'm sure there is some.
No, I'm saying they might be thinking, but they're not going to do anything right now. I'm saying they're not going to do anything right now. They'll hold their horses, what they call strategic patience. They'll hold their horses now. They'll see what others are doing, then they'll go in. Not right now.
So I just want to ask Mr. Ambassador Ganapati, so what kind of, preparations are done when foreign office is faced with such a situation?
I think, yes, obviously, it's a very, very important point which Seema Guha has made and you have repeated. But let me put it this way. I think to do anything, what is very, very important, as I had said earlier, and you also mentioned it, is we need a government to talk to. And is that government ready to talk to us? That is the other point. Are we in their radar for the leadership? Yes, we have only heard from various spokespersons and not people in authority. From none in authority, we have as yet heard anything. The second question is, your question directly, when such situations do occur, I think what does happen in the Ministry of External Affairs is, it is not just the Ministry of External Affairs which is involved, but the ministry also consults with the agencies concerned. And there is always the Cabinet Committee on Security at the apex body. And then you have the Ministry of External Affairs, the Joint Secretaries interacting with the agencies, both within the MHA, within the Cabinet Secretariat, to take a coherent view as to how we should move ahead. And I'm sure Mr. Rana Banerjee would be able to chip in also there, because it is not taken in isolation. It is a view which is taken in conjunct, in harmony with the other authorities. Now, in terms of development aid, now the question is, yes, we would be, if at all, if it comes to it, we have done it before, and would we be able to do it, is the question is, would they accept it, is the question. Will the, if the airport opens with, say, Qatari or Turkish airport authorities, I mean, opening up the Kabul airport or the Bagram Air Base or others, if development assistance is offered to the people of Afghanistan, would it be accepted? Would be the next question. So I think wait and watch does not mean, as I said, nothing is happening at all. Or I'm sure the Joint Secretary IPA's office would be definitely very much involved in interacting with his other colleagues in the other departments of the government to see what we can do, what we should do. In fact, I remember when we have had various such situations of distress in other countries, the government of India, that is the Ministry of External Affairs, always works in adjunct, in tandem with the other departments of the government. Now, I think Dakshinamurthy had always has been very strong in his views. I respect that. But I think we need to be very careful what we do. And let us not for a moment think that nothing is happening. There will be a lot of discussions within the government. We need to take it forward. How do we take it forward would be the next question when we have some presence in Kabul of the government of Afghanistan, and then the next stages.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Banerjee, quickly, one question. I mean, we need to have discuss this very, very briefly. What do you think kind of implications could have on Jammu and Kashmir? Because that's a very important point.
You see, you have to see which are the Islamic outfits which have found succor inside Afghanistan. There is the Islamic State Khorasan, and there is the Al-Qaeda remnant, Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent. Yeah. Now, Asim Omar, the Al-Qaeda head in Afghanistan, was killed in an Afghan Taliban compound in Helmand in September 2020 in an action by the Allied forces, the National Security Forces of Afghanistan, and the Americans and the British. So after that, the Al-Qaeda has suffered a setback. The Islamic State of Khorasan, these are basically remnants from the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. They are Pakistani Punjabis and Pashtuns. And there are factions within them. There is one faction which is a Punjabi Pakistani faction. There is another faction which is a Turkmen Tajik faction. So between the two factions, there are rifts which the ISI has been playing up or is capable of playing up against the Taliban if the Taliban become too independent. So this thing we have to keep at the back of our minds. At the moment, the Taliban will be, Afghan Taliban will not ideologically give up on these elements, but they may be able to douse their enthusiasm or restrain them till they settle down themselves. And it would be naive on our part, before we know actually what the Taliban reaction to these elements is, to just go headlong into a relationship of we want to engage, therefore we are going in and having an engagement with the Taliban. It would be naive on our part. We have to take at face value what they are saying about, but even then there are ambiguous messages. Sohail Shaheen said something about being Muslims, and therefore the issue of Muslims in Kashmir cannot be something they will not be unaffected by. Zabiullah Mujahid, not Habibullah, Zabiullah Mujahid in the past has said that yes, it could be, it's a bilateral issue for the Afghans to settle. Khalil Haqqani, uncle of Sirajuddin Haqqani, has said that problems which are there between these outfits and the parent country, for example, the Tehrik-e-Taliban and the Pakistanis, it is for them to settle themselves between them in a dialogue. So this is something, if they follow in word what they say in speech, it's something which would be positively assessed by us, but not before. We cannot rush headlong into a relationship with the Taliban because of the fact in the past there has been no trust and they have always betrayed on what they have said. So we have to be cautious.
Right. Right. Ambassador, one question before yeah, Shubhi, you want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to bring to the discussion three things. One is a breaking news that Taliban has postponed government formation by another week. So, and of course, this happens when the IS, as you were saying, is very well said. So there is already much of not an easy thing. They have already officially announced Zabiullah Mujahid that is postponed by at least 1 week. Secondly, there is a very interesting development. Tajikistan has today lifted the ban on hijab. Has lifted the ban on hijab. Now, Tajikistan, people who understand Afghanistan and the Tajik factor, Ahmed Shah Massoud, his son fighting in Panjshir, this is a very clear signal to the Taliban that Tajiks are not going to take some nonsense, that happens to them. So Tajikistan is, and we have air bases in Tajikistan. Indian Air Force has air bases in Tajikistan. So this is very significant, I would imagine. Yeah, for sure. Oh no. So, so this is the second very interesting development, that some of the smaller regional players, I'm not talking of China, Russia, but the stans, the three stans, they have their ethnic sort of relationship, and these ethnic ties, as we have seen in the East as well, like Zoram Thangas, whatever Delhi may say, Zoram Thanga will say that the chain refugees will come into Mizoram. I don't care what Mr. Modi or Amit Shah is saying. They don't understand this. We are Mizos, they are Chins, we are brothers. So, this ethnic factor playing out along the northern borders, what Uzbekistan or Tajikistan does is significant. And already the first salvo has been fired. No hijab here. So, this is not just a flaw to the Tajiks, fight on, but I think this is also to the Afghan women, that this is what we are doing.
Yes.
Hijab has been banned. It's not optional.
It's
Number
banned,
three,
you mean to say?
Banned,
Wow.
yes. Yeah. And number three, Srinivasan, I would like to bring, about these development projects. If you recall, during Mr. Xi and Mr. Modi's, summit in Wuhan, the Chinese had actually suggested that they want to do a project together with India in Afghanistan. Why?
Yes.
Because there was huge criticism that the Chinese projects are top-down and imposed and lead people to debt trap, whereas the Indian projects are community interest driven and that kind of stuff. There is an opening there for India, I would imagine, and I go with Dakshin Murthy on this, and Seema, that we need to do something. And one of the things we can do, I don't believe in rushing headlong. I've seen Bangladesh 2001, rushing headlong to befriend Begum Zia and Jamaat-e-Islami, and then we find that Mr. Tariq Rahman was brought to Delhi by our friends, Mr. Banerjee knows them, suddenly seen having a meeting with the ISI station chief in Dubai, who conducts all the operations against India, and also Dawood Ibrahim. So I am against rushing headlong into, to make friendship with friends who cannot be trusted. But I also say that a limited engagement, we take up the Chinese now and say, okay, not leave out the Chinese, but we can take on the Taliban offer and say, okay, we agree, these projects are for the Afghan people. Let's complete the projects which are not yet finished. That gives us a presence there. And a presence not purely from the development point of view. Mr. Banerjee will understand what I'm hinting at. We need people there on ground for different reasons, yeah? So we need to at least take that opportunity and say, okay, the Taliban have made this offer. Our Mr. Sher Mohammad has made that offer. India should come back and finish the project. We go and do at least some of the projects so that we have some kind of a presence short of an embassy, short of an official presence.
Thank you. Trust a journalist to bring in breaking news into the discussion. Fantastic. So here it is. What you're saying is very important. There is also a question from from a viewer. So we'll just take one question. See, what is a likely, like you mentioned, that at one point of time China was interested in going along with.
No, it's in the communique. Communique.
So the BRI project is extremely important for China. And they have also invested, of course, they had one setback when 9 Chinese were killed on the
Only one, two, 3 attacks, not just one,
So
several attacks.
They're concerned about that as well. So I want everyone to quickly take this and then do a concluding remark one by one. Ambassador, can you just kind of wrap it up for us and then also touch upon this situation, how development could also play a crucial role?
No, I think Subir Bhaumik did mention this very important point of the Sino-Indian so-called agreement, I would say. Of course, there was no joint statement. It was a statement made individually by each of the foreign secretaries of each of the ministers, because I think the agreement was neither in Wuhan nor in Mamallapuram would we have any joint statement. But in terms of the third country projects, I think I did talk to a couple of my colleagues, and there was not much beyond training of diplomats. That's what the Chinese also were very keen on, because what happened in 2018 in Wuhan and in 2019 in Mamallapuram has been overtaken by events in 2020 and 2021. Yes. And the Chinese definitely, to my thinking, would not be very keen on taking any third country projects involve a third country Sino-Indian projects, which would mean projects in Afghanistan. Because for them today, if Afghanistan falls like a ripe apple onto their lap, I think it gives them a great possibility of having the entire Western theater to India, that is Pakistan, Afghanistan, and some of the Central Asian states, right into their fold, to Gwadar, to Chabahar and other places. So I think the Chinese would no longer be interested in a third country project. Of course, this is for the future. We'll have to see how it goes. In terms of development projects, I again get back to the same point, which was also echoed by Mr. Banerjee. We don't know what sort of a government is there going to be in Kabul. Whom do we talk to about these projects? Would there be security for our people going there to continue the projects? And finally, what sort of, nothing is done in vacuum. So what would be the thing for us there? Now, would we be going in before recognition of any government or after recognition? I think it would be very foolhardy to do anything without a government in place and which has been accorded the legitimacy which it would be due. Legitimacy would mean control of the entire territory of Afghanistan and also giving us the necessary requirements which would ensure our security. Of course, Mr. Dakshinamurthy talked in terms of Islamic extremism. For us, it's more important to see that there is no terrorism in any part of India, which includes Jammu and Kashmir, from Afghanistan, which emanates from Afghanistan. This was what the presidential statement of the two statements made during our presidency was there, and also the final August 31 UN Security Council resolution states. So that would be a very, very important precondition, if I can put it, because without that, it would be a vacuum which would affect and would be inimical to our larger national interest.
Thank you. Quickly, Mr. Banerjee, why there is a delay also in the formation? Does it indicate that there is a problem there?
Yes, in fact, this is something I was just going to comment on, and Subir's breaking news, as usual, brings us little cheer. If this is a delay, it is definitely due to one of two things. One, it could be the internal factionalism within the Taliban, which they have not been able to sort out between the Mullah Yaqub versus Sirajuddin Haqqani factions. And it could be an indicator to larger schism which may develop. The other could be about the pressure from the regional powers and the Western powers about formation of inclusive government, giving share to ethnic components and to women, which they have been reluctant to do. So on both these factors or both these issues, these are developments which portend well for an India which is sitting outside waiting and watching. The other point I would like to make, just to clear the cobwebs that have been there, that there have been no contacts with the Taliban, or why should there not be discrete contacts with the Taliban? I mean, you underestimate the capacity of our intelligence services.
So we don't. We are reading about you.
Well, some do. Some people do. Way back in 2009, 2010, when the former National Security Advisor, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, was there, there was a international conference in Goa where we had invited Mullah Zaid.
Right.
Who was, as you
Right. I think
the Pakistani, the Talibani ambassador, Pakistani, and today, of course, he has formally desisted from the Taliban, but he remains in Kabul and he lives like a normal individual Afghan.
Right.
So it is not that we don't have goodwill among people who are close to the Taliban.
right.
And you must factor this in whatever.
I think, Mr. Banerjee, there is a loss of
So do
audio
not
loss.
underestimate the intelligence service to open a line with Taliban. That's what I'd like to add. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there is a audio loss. We couldn't hear fully. But anybody who wants to quickly say anything before I conclude quickly?
What I can say, sorry, just one point, one observation basically. Now that China is also on the verge of getting in Afghanistan, it's funny because the British came and went to came into Afghanistan and left. The Soviets came and left. Then came the US and they have left. But the only difference is the Chinese are being invited into Afghanistan, or they are forcing themselves into Afghanistan. Is going to unravel, but it's going to be very.
But even the Russians were invited by Najib to help.
Yeah,
them.
that's right. So we should see how this is going to pan out. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Can I?
Yeah, quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. My point is Afghanistan latest challenge to Indian foreign policy. Let's not forget the other challenges. The tendency of Indian state is always to look west and north. As one Bangladesh editor once said, India has two neighbors, Pakistan and China, and we are not one of them. Let's also don't forget that there's a huge crisis in Myanmar, a huge challenge for India, which is linked to India's active policy. So let not Afghanistan take away our entire attention of our foreign office, our diplomats, our agencies.
And journalists.
Journalists, I don't even cover.
Right.
I think, at least, look east and act east should not be cliche. There is a huge crisis similar to Afghanistan emerging in Myanmar. Bangladesh also, we can't underestimate the problems there. So let's also look east and not just get carried away by the challenge that is Afghanistan. Thank you.
Right. Finally, let me just conclude. We are running out of time already.
Yes, I don't have anything to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank all the panelists. There have been lots of views which have come, but one important thing which Ambassador Ganapathy has said, that it's really important that wait and watch doesn't mean that we are in a state of inactivity. The Indian guys are actually, the foreign office is actually might be looking at those kind of things, which is necessary at this point of time. The other key thing is, Subir is consistently insisting, and it's a very, very different perspective, and a very important one, that look east, talk east, don't forget this.
Refreshing.
India is not just, all along our foreign policy for a long, we are accused of looking only Pakistan and not China. But then things are much bigger. We need to have a much bigger holistic look at this. And then Seema provided some important point about our own soft power and the gains which we have made last 2 decades, how we shouldn't be giving up on that. And there is a counterpoint view, of course, from Dakshin, and very, very valuable points from Mr. Rana Banerjee, who gave a lot of insights on very key
situation. Can I ask one small question, please, to the diplomat and
you can then
conclude. Can India really help in Panjshir Valley? Can we do anything? And how long can they hold on? Because they're completely
that's a question I missed.
Is it possible at all to do anything? I would love us to help them.
We all want to help Masood and Saleh. He's a great friend of India.
I think we observe the situation very, very, very closely and respond accordingly.
Right, as diplomatic. Okay. Finally, thank you very much. It's been wonderful. I think we can go on for another half an hour or so, but then we have to close it somewhere. I think
Thanks, Srinivasan.
The situation itself is so, volatile that Taliban themselves are not able to put together a government. They're postponed by a week. That itself indicates the enormity of the situation unraveling on the ground. Thank you very much. I thank everyone for such a nice discussion.